The War Council chamber aboard the Cathari flagship resolute stank of ozone and fear pheromones. Commander Threx gripped the hololithic tactical display with 3 of his 4 hands, his primary eyes fixed on the tidal wave of red icons sweeping toward Delos. The Vorr swarm moved like oil through water, a stain spreading across the gravity well, and behind it lay a trail of dead colonies. 12 civilizations in 300 years. The Ascendancy and the Torven clans were next on the menu. 6 hours, Tactical Officer Quinn reported, her subharmonic voice trembling at the edges. The outer defense platforms will fall in 4, Delos in 5. We'll be fighting in atmosphere by the 6th. Threx's secondary eyelids flicked. He'd sent the emergency broadcast on every known frequency. The old packed channels, the neutral trade routes, even the forbidden deep space relays left behind by the precursor civilizations. Anything that might bring help. Nothing had answered. The Torven Clawlord is requesting permission to charge the line, Quinn said. He says if they're going to die, they'd rather die moving forward. Denied. Threx's voice came out harder than he intended. Tell him bravery isn't the same as strategy. If we break formation, the Vorr will envelop us in minutes. And if we stay? Threx didn't answer. The math was the math, outnumbered 30-1. The Vorr didn't take prisoners, didn't negotiate, didn't even communicate except through the absorbed voices of their victims. They consumed biomass and neural patterns, adding the strength of every conquered species to their own. Every Cathari and Torven warrior who died today would wake up tomorrow as part of the hive, their memories stripped for tactical data, their consciousness dissolved into screaming fragments. The bridge doors hissed open. A junior communications officer entered, her crest feathers flattened in a display Threx had never seen before. Not fear, confusion. Commander, we've received a transmission. From the Vorr. Unknown origin. It overrode our systems. She extended a data slate with a trembling claw. The encryption protocols didn't activate. The firewalls didn't activate. The message simply forced itself into our navigation array. Threx took the slate. The text was rendered in flawless High Cathari, though the syntax carried an odd, angular directness that matched no known diplomatic template. Withdraw to Orbit 7. Human Armada inbound. Do not interfere. Human, Threx said, tasting the unfamiliar word. Quinn, search the archives. Anything on a species called human. Quinn's manipulator tentacles flew across her console. 1 entry, obscure, marked as a Class 4 Deathworld sapient from the Orion Spur. Last recorded contact with Galactic Society was 2,000 standard years ago. The file is sealed under Pact Moratorium Code Black. Code Black, the designation for species deemed too dangerous for standard diplomatic frameworks. What does that mean, sealed? Threx demanded. It means the Pact didn't just warn against contact, Commander. They deleted the coordinates of the human home system from every navigational database, as if they wanted the galaxy to forget they existed. The tactical display flickered. Every Vorr vessel, all 33,000 of them, had stopped moving. Threx felt his respiratory spiracles lock. The swarm that had been accelerating toward Delos like a living avalanche had simply halted. In perfect unison, the organic ships rotated on their axes, reorienting toward a patch of empty space 3 light minutes spinward. They're scared, Quinn whispered. The Vorr don't feel fear. They're a hive-mind. Fear requires individuality. Then what do you call that? On the display, the swarm began reorganizing. Not for attack, for defense. Layers of bioships interlocked into a shield formation that the Vorr had never used, had never needed to use in 300 years of unstoppable expansion. The empty space they faced shimmered. Not with the violent tear of a jump point or the flash of a hyperdrive translation. The void simply began to ripple, like heat rising off sun-baked stone, and within those ripples, shapes began to resolve. Geometries that hurt to look at, hull designs that seemed to slide off the eye, absorbing the light of distant stars rather than reflecting it. Ships that had been there all along, hidden so completely that they existed outside local spacetime itself. The human armada had arrived. And the Vorr, the nightmare that had consumed a dozen civilizations, started to scream. Admiral Jessup Vance stood on the command deck of the UNSS Epilogue with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the Vorr fleet scramble like insects beneath a lifted rock. The Epilogue wasn't a flagship in any traditional sense. She carried no diplomatic suites, no ceremonial chambers, no observation decks for visiting dignitaries. Every cubic meter of her hull was dedicated to one purpose: the efficient application of terminal force. Her crew moved with the quiet economy of professionals who had done this many times before. Phase transition complete, Captain Reyes announced from the operations pit. All battle groups report green. The Xenos are clear of the engagement zone, barely. Vance nodded. The Cathari and Torven ships had retreated to the designated orbit with admirable speed. Sensible species. He'd studied their files during the transit. The Cathari were methodical diplomats, the Torven honorable warriors. Both had fought the Vorr with courage, and both had been losing badly. That was about to change. "The Allies are hailing us," Reyes said. "Multiple frequencies. The Cathari commander is demanding to know who we are and under what authority we're operating." "Ignore them." "Sorry. They're not the mission." Vance walked forward, stopping at the edge of the tactical hologram. The Vorr swarm had completed its defensive realignment, 33,000 vessels locked into a formation that would have presented a formidable challenge to any conventional fleet. Thick layers of organic armor, interlocking fields of bioplasma weaponry. The hive-mind was running threat assessments on every available processor, trying to find a weakness in the human formation. It wouldn't find any. "Broadcast the package," Vance ordered. "On the hive frequency." "That's the one." Reyes hesitated. "Sir, the package contains. We've never deployed a full-spectrum cognitive weapon against a hive of this magnitude. The ethics board." "The ethics board signed off on Vorr protocol 2 centuries ago, Captain. They just didn't know when we'd need it. Today's the day. Transmit." The Epilogue's communications array came alive, but not with the modulated carrier, waves of standard radio, or the entangled pulses of quantum comms. This was something older, something that spoke to the architecture of consciousness itself. The humans had spent 50 years mapping the Vorr hive mind, tracing every synaptic pathway, cataloging every absorbed neural pattern that made up its collective intelligence. The package wasn't a virus. It was a mirror. Across the void, the Vorr received the transmission. Every bioship, every drone, every node in the vast distributed mind experienced it identically. The weapon showed them what they were, not what they believed themselves to be, a unified consciousness evolving toward perfection, but what they truly were, seen from the outside. A screaming chorus of stolen souls. Every species the Vorr had ever absorbed was still there, still conscious, still screaming, their individual identities crushed into service but never fully extinguished. The humans had isolated those fragments of awareness, mapped them, and now played them back to the hive mind on its own internal frequency. The Vorr felt, for the first time in 3 centuries, the full weight of what they had done. Their defensive formation collapsed. Bioships began firing on each other, their neural control systems overwhelmed by a cacophony of resurrected agony. Cruisers the size of small moons convulsed, their organic hulls tearing open as the hive mind's control fractured along the fault lines the humans had surgically exposed. Admiral Vance watched the chaos unfold with cold, clinical attention. "Phase 1 complete," he said. "Prepare Girder-Demerung devices for deployment. Let's finish this." Threx watched the Vorr destroy themselves and understood that he was witnessing something that would haunt him for the remainder of his life. The tactical display on the Resolute had become a panorama of impossible violence. Vorr bioships, the most feared vessels in the explored galaxy, were devouring their own kind. Organic hulls split open, spilling clouds of atmosphere and biomass into the void. Neural control signals, normally the unbreakable tether that held the swarm in perfect coordination, had become conduits of madness. "Science Station," Threx managed, his voice barely functional. "What is happening?" Science Officer Pelix had abandoned his station, pressing his manipulator limbs against the observation viewport as if proximity to the carnage would help him understand it. His crest feathers had gone white, a physiological response Threx had only read about in medical texts. Terminal shock. "There, the humans transmitted something," Pelix said, his voice distant and strange. "I caught a fragment of it. The quarantine buffers on our comm array isolated it before it could propagate, but I saw the structure. Commander, it wasn't a weapon in any sense we understand. It was data, a complete cartographic analysis of the Vorr hive-mind's cognitive architecture, every absorbed consciousness, mapped and indexed." "That's impossible. The Vorr have consumed billions of individuals across 12 civilizations. Mapping that would take." "The humans have been studying them for a long time," Quen said quietly. "They knew exactly where to cut." Threx forced himself to look at the Allied fleet status. The Torven Clawlord, who had been ready to charge into a glorious death 30 minutes ago, had gone silent. His warships had pulled back even further than Orbit 7, retreating to the edge of the system's gravity well. "Get me communication with the human commander," Threx said. "I don't care what override codes you have to use or what protocols you have to break. Get me a channel." "Commander, the humans are ignoring every hail. They haven't acknowledged our existence since the warning transmission." The Vorr flagship, a continent-sized abomination that had served as the Hive's central processing node, began to convulse. Threx watched through the magnified display as its surface rippled, organic armor plates slewing off into space. For a moment he thought he saw something emerge from the wounds, shapes, faces, the half-formed outlines of species he recognized from the historical archives. The Sylvanthi, the Itri Collective, the Dreadden Ascendancy. All of them, still somehow alive within the Hive's memory, now burning their way out like fire through paper. "They're not just killing the Vorr," Pelix whispered. "They're giving the victims their revenge." The Vorr flagship detonated, not with the controlled destruction of a reactor breach, but with a wet, organic burst that sent filaments of neural tissue spiraling into the void. The death of the central node cascaded through the remaining ships, each one seizing as its connection to the collective consciousness was severed. But the humans weren't finished. Threx saw them deploy something new, small devices that didn't register on the standard weapon spectrum analysis. They drifted toward the disabled Vorr vessels like seeds on a wind, and where they touched, the bioships simply stopped existing. Not exploding, not burning, but collapsing into geometric impossibilities that hurt Threx's eyes to perceive. The matter was being erased on a quantum level, unmade so thoroughly that even the background radiation of their presence vanished. The Vorr fleet disappeared in silence, and the void grew cold. Admiral Vance watched the Girder-Demerung devices complete their work with the detached satisfaction of a surgeon closing an incision. Total erasure. The Vorr vessels weren't destroyed. Destruction implied debris, wreckage, some trace element that could be studied or salvaged or, in the case of a mimetic parasite like the Vorr, potentially reconstructed by some fool who didn't know what they were handling. The Girder-Demerung protocol didn't leave traces. It unmade matter at the information level, collapsing quantum states until the target's existence was mathematically indistinguishable from the vacuum around it. "Final sweep complete," Captain Reyes reported. 33,412 Vorr vessels confirmed erased. No survivors. No escape transmissions. The Hive frequency is silent. The Allies. Still hailing us. The Cathari commander is becoming agitated. The Torven have pulled back to an outer orbit and appear to be debating whether to flee the system entirely. Vance allowed himself a thin smile. "Smart soldiers, let's bring the Cathari commander aboard. I think it's time for a conversation." "Sir, standing orders from Earth Central Command dictate no direct contact with non-sanctioned xenopolitical entities without psychological compatibility screening. The Cathari just watched us delete a threat they've been fighting for 3 centuries in the span of 2 hours. If we don't talk to them, they'll fill the silence with their own theories. I'd rather they heard the truth from us than invented something worse." Reyes nodded and relayed the orders. The Epilogue's hangar bay prepared to receive a Cathari shuttle, and Vance descended to the diplomatic reception chamber. It was a sparse room. All gray bulkheads and functional lighting. The only decoration was a single emblem on the far wall, Earth, seen from orbit half in shadow. Beneath it, words in Old English script, "Lest we forget." Commander Threx entered flanked by 2 security officers whose body language screamed their discomfort. The Cathari were an imposing species, 2.5 meters tall, 4 arms, a face that combined avian sharpness with something almost mammalian. But Threx looked diminished, his crest feathers still pale from the shock of what he'd witnessed. "You're the human commander," Threx said. "Admiral Vance, thank you for accepting my invitation." "Invitation? Your fleet appeared from nowhere and destroyed an enemy that has plagued the galaxy for 3 centuries. Your weapons unmake reality. Your ships ignore the laws of physics. You ignored our hails for 2 hours. Threx's voice sharpened. "What am I here for, Admiral?" Vance gestured to a pair of seats. "Sit down, Commander. What I'm about to tell you, you're not going to like." Threx remained standing. "I'm past the point of liking anything about today." "Fair enough." Vance clasped his hands behind his back. The Vorr hive-mind wasn't a natural evolutionary development. It was a weapon we made. The silence in the chamber stretched until Threx's crest feathers began to darken, the color returning in a surge of something that looked very much like dread. "Explain," Threx said. 2,000 years ago, humanity was fighting a war, not against another species, against ourselves, a civil conflict that spanned 100 star systems. One faction developed a mimetic weapon designed to assimilate enemy populations, breaking down individual consciousness and repurposing it for the war effort. They called it Project Legion. The weapon escaped containment. It consumed its creators, then everything else in the system. We thought we destroyed it. You didn't. It fled across the intergalactic void. It's been feeding its way back toward us ever since." Vance met Threx's gaze. "What you call the Vorr is a fragment of our darkest mistake, and today we cleaned up our mess." Epilogue's observation bay looked out on the empty space where the Vorr fleet had died. Threx stood at the viewport, his 4 arms crossed tight against his chest, trying to process what Admiral Vance had told him. It explained so much. The Vorr's strange technological signature, their lack of any homeworld, their relentless expansion toward the Orion Spur. They weren't conquering. They were returning. "How many of you are there?" Threx asked. "Classified." "How many fleets like this one?" "Classified." "What else have you lost? What other weapons from your civil war are still out there, feeding their way back toward you?" Vance joined him at the viewport. "That's the question, isn't it? We've been cleaning up our own messes for 2 millennia. Project Legion was one of 7 autonomous weapons platforms that escaped during the war. We've accounted for 5. The Vorr were number 6. Threx felt his respiratory spiracles seize. "There's one more out there." Number 7 went dark 800 years ago. No confirmed sightings, no attack patterns that match its profile. The prevailing theory at command is that it's dormant, waiting for something, or someone. "And your fleet, you monitor the galaxy for threats you created." "We monitor for threats, period. The Vorr just happened to be ours." Vance's expression flickered, something passing behind his eyes that Threx couldn't read. "We don't expect gratitude, Commander. We don't expect understanding, but we do expect you to remember what you saw today. Not just the weapons, the reason we use them. You're telling me humanity is dangerous. I'm telling you humanity is responsible. Vance turned from the viewport. We made mistakes that would have annihilated a lesser species. We survived them. We learned from them. And now we walk the void cleaning up after ourselves because no one else can. Threx processed this. The implications were staggering. A species old enough to have fought interstellar wars while his ancestors were discovering fire, powerful enough to unmake matter, and haunted enough by their past to dedicate their existence to atonement. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "You could have destroyed the Vorr and vanished. We would have invented our own explanations. Myths, legends, religious interpretations. Why give me the truth?" "Because we're not going to vanish. Not this time." Vance's voice carried a weight that pressed against Threx's chest. "The galaxy is getting smaller, Commander. Threats are proliferating. The pact that sealed our homeworld's coordinates and tried to pretend we didn't exist, it's failing. Species are stumbling onto things they shouldn't find, waking up dangers that have slept since before your civilization's sun ignited. So you're returning. We're announcing ourselves. This fleet, this intervention, it's the beginning. Humanity is coming back to the galactic stage, not as conquerors, not as saviors, as the ones who know where the bodies are buried, because Commander Threx," Vance met his gaze and held it, "we buried most of them. The alarm klaxons shattered the fragile calm like glass." Admiral Vance was on the bridge in seconds, Captain Reyes falling into step beside him. "Report. Cathari vessel Soul of Dawn has broken formation. They're moving toward the Vorr debris field." Reyes' voice was tight with controlled fury. "Specifically, they're heading for Sector Gamma, where we erased the Hive's secondary processing node." Vance felt his jaw tighten. The Girder-Demerung protocol was thorough, but the Vorr's neural architecture had been vast. A secondary node might have left behind organic residue, nothing that could reconstitute itself, but enough for a determined species to begin reverse engineering the mimetic weapon structure. "Who commands the Soul of Dawn?" "Warlord Kethix, one of the Torven clans, but operating under Cathari diplomatic cover. Our files mark him as a weapons collector, specializes in salvaging enemy technology after major engagements." Vance's hands curled into fists. Of course. The galaxy was full of scavengers who picked through the bones of old wars, looking for an edge, never understanding that some weapons couldn't be controlled, only contained. "Get me Commander Threx." The Cathari commander appeared on the main display, his crest feathers already darkening with the colors of distress. "Admiral, I've been informed. Warlord Kethix is not under my command. He has diplomatic standing with the Torven clans, and I cannot." "I'm not asking for permission, Commander. I'm informing you of consequences." Vance turned to Reyes. "Intercept course. Maximum burn." The epilogue surged forward, her drives tearing through the fabric of spacetime with a violence that made the Cathari sensors flicker. On the tactical display, the Soul of Dawn had already entered the debris field, extending salvage tendrils toward the faint organic residue drifting through the void. "Hail them," Vance ordered. "Channel open." "Cathari vessel Soul of Dawn. This is Admiral Vance of the Terran Armada. You are in a restricted zone. Withdraw immediately or you will be fired upon." The response came not from the Cathari captain but from Warlord Kethix himself, a massive Torven whose ceremonial scars covered every visible inch of his scaled hide. "Admiral Vance, your weapons are impressive. Your claim on this debris is not. The Vorr attacked our worlds. Their remains are ours by right of conquest. Those remains contain a mimetic contagion that your species has no defense against. You're not salvaging weapons. You're salvaging your own extinction." Kethix laughed, a deep rumble that vibrated through the comm channel. "The Vorr are dead. What's left is technology, power, and I intend to claim it." The salvage tendrils made contact with the organic residue. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Soul of Dawn's bridge lights flickered. The ship's comm array erupted with a transmission that wasn't a voice but a scream. The same scream the Vorr had made when the humans played back their stolen souls. But now it was new, hungry, and it was coming from inside the Cathari vessel. "They're reanimating," Reyes said, her voice sharp with horror. The residue wasn't inert. The hive-mind embedded a dormant backup. It was waiting for something to touch it. Vance didn't hesitate. "Target the Soul of Dawn. Girder Demerung devices full spread." "Admiral, there are 400 Cathari and Torven aboard that ship. And if that backup propagates, there will be 400 billion dead across the galaxy. Fire." The epilogue's weapons deployed with mechanical precision. The devices crossed the distance to the Soul of Dawn in seconds, and the Cathari vessel began to collapse, its matter unmaking itself layer by layer. The screams on the comm channel cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. Warlord Kethix's voice came back one last time, no longer laughing, no longer arrogant, just a whisper. What have you done?" Then nothing. The observation bay was silent except for the soft hum of the epilogue's environmental systems. Commander Threx stared at the empty coordinates where the Soul of Dawn had been. 400 souls, gone in the space of a breath. Cathari and Torven both. His hands trembled at his sides and he made no effort to still them. Admiral Vance stood beside him, his expression unreadable. The human commander had said nothing since giving the order. He had simply waited, watching the void, as if the weight of what he'd just done was something he'd carried for so long that it had become part of his posture. "You saved us," Threx said, his voice raw. "Then you killed us." "I stopped an outbreak. The Vorr consumed 12 civilizations because someone made the mistake of thinking they could control a weapon they didn't understand. I wasn't going to let that happen again." Warlord Kethix was a fool, but his crew were victims of his foolishness, I know. Vance turned to face Threx, and for the first time the Cathari commander saw something beneath the Admiral's controlled exterior. Not cruelty, not indifference, just the terrible clarity of someone who had made this choice before and would make it again. "We don't expect gratitude, Commander. We don't expect forgiveness. We expect you to remember." Threx's crest feathers rippled. "Remember what?" "That the universe is filled with old, buried horrors. Weapons and plagues and machines that have been sleeping since before your species learned to write. We know where they sleep because we put most of them there. And we are the only ones who can put them back. You're asking us to trust you." "No." Vance's voice was quiet, absolute. "I'm asking you to be afraid of us, because fear will keep you from touching things you shouldn't touch. Fear will keep your salvage teams out of Vorr debris fields. Fear will make you call us when you find something ancient and terrible and hungry instead of trying to weaponize it." The human Armada began its phase transition, the ships shimmering as they prepared to slide back into the darkness from which they'd come. Threx watched them go, his mind churning with everything he'd learned. Humanity wasn't a savior species. They were caretakers of a graveyard that spanned the galaxy, walking a patrol route that had been laid down 2,000 years ago. "Will we see you again?" Threx asked. Vance paused at the threshold of the observation bay. "If you're lucky, no. If you're not lucky, you'll see us soon. Pray you're lucky, Commander." The Admiral disappeared into the corridor, and the door slid shut behind him. Threx turned back to the viewport. The last of the human ships faded from sight, their stealth systems wrapping them in folds of spacetime that no sensor could penetrate. The Vorr were gone. The threat that had haunted 12 civilizations for 3 centuries had been erased so completely that future historians would struggle to prove it had ever existed. But the humans remained, somewhere out there in the dark, watching, waiting, carrying the burden of their ancient sins. The galaxy felt larger than it had this morning, and far, far more dangerous. Commander Threx stood alone in the observation bay for a long time, staring at the empty star chart, saved but no longer safe. He thought about the seventh weapon, the one still sleeping, the one the humans hadn't found yet. He thought about what would happen when someone stumbled across it. And he thought about what Admiral Vance had said, the words echoing in his mind like a warning carved into stone. Pray you're lucky. The Resolute's engines hummed to life, and the Allied fleet began its long journey home, carrying with it a truth that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never sleep soundly again.